Hello, everyone at home. I hope you are safe and well. Thank you for joining us for what we hope is a very special NHSN talk all about the North East Bee Hunt and how you can get involved at home. I'm joined here by a wonderful bunch of bee enthusiasts. We have Charlotte Rankin, local entomologist and NHSN project officer, Dr. Gordon Port, NHSN's invertebrate section lead, and Louise Hislop, local entomologist and bee enthusiast. So we'll start with a very brief introduction to the North East Bee Hunt from Gordon.
Thanks, James. Last year we had a particular project running in the NHSN, which was to lead up to the publication of our bumblebees of North East England. And that involved many of us writing parts of the text and pulling together pictures, and we were very, very touched and impressed by the amount of interest that this caused. And indeed, the talk that we gave at the launch event in January of this year was one of the best attended talks we've ever had. Those of you who couldn't get into the main lecture theatre may remember it for all the wrong reasons. We wanted to follow up on this because people were obviously enthused about the bees and the bumblebees. And we wanted to try and engage as many members of the public as we could, whether they were starters or semi-experts or enthusiasts. And so we decided we would launch a citizen science project in the early part of 2020, which we called the North East Bee Hunt, although whilst we're interested in all bee records, we're just focusing in on 5 distinctive North East bee species. And we couldn't have imagined how much interest this would have caused, because now that people are effectively restricted in their ability to get out and about, or spending more time around their houses and in their gardens, one of the things that people are noticing is how much wildlife actually occurs close to their homes, and the North East Bee Hunt provides them with an opportunity to actually submit records of these bees to our recording portal, and we can improve our information based on that.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I guess what people at home really want to know is, why is it important to record bees, and why is it important right now to record bees? Louise?
Yes, well, why record bees? We need to know what species we have, where they are and when they are. If we don't know what's there, how will we know if something changes? And also, how will we protect them? Records give details of things like habitat, seasons of flight, flowers visited, and so on. And so we can organise and think about how to manage those particular areas for particular species, and particularly ones that are in trouble or have problems. It's easy to ignore common species, but as we all know, they can quite suddenly disappear when you think of some of the other species we've recorded over time. Why now? In lockdown, obviously, we do have time to really go into detail in our local area and concentrate and see what we really have. Perhaps we can pick a common species and record every time we see it, not just the first time or the first time we see a youngster. So it's just getting more detailed pictures than we would normally do, and also really concentrating. Perhaps if you go for a walk, your daily walk, you find a particular area that you've never noticed before, and you again concentrate on that and perhaps say, right, okay, I will record every species in this one small park or area of walk, one road verge, whatever you've got, and really concentrate and see what you've got. And it gives us a whole new detail of species that we don't actually have at the moment.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So let's just say someone has noticed a bee in their garden. How do they go about submitting a record to the North East Bee Hunt goal?
Well, the details are set out on the web page, but we decided that for the North East Bee Hunt, there are lots of different recording platforms, but one that many people have come across is iRecord, as you can see on the screen share here. Now, this particular page, James has logged into it, and so it shows that his name up in the top right there. And if you come to this page to enter a casual record, that's perfectly fine. What we would ask you to do is make sure that once you've registered for iRecord, you also select the Northeast Bee Hunt activity, because that will allow you to submit your records specifically to this effort that we're making. However your records go in, they will be recorded, but you just record them once, and preferably by submitting to the activity, the Northeast Bee Hunt. And then working our way down the recording page, here's one we filled in earlier. So the first box you need to fill in is the date you saw the specimen. If you've logged into iRecord, the second box gives your name as the recorder, and that's presumably correct. You're the one who's submitting the record. We chose as one of the species from our 5 that we're using in the Northeast Bee Hunt, the tree bumblebee, to put into the species box. That third box, when it's blank, you start typing in the name, either the common name or the scientific name, and it will prompt you as to which species you're trying to record. So if you type in tree bumble, it will start prompting you, is this the tree bumblebee, Bombus hypnorum? The next box over certainty is about how confident you are about your record. It's probably not necessary in our case to worry too much about that. The next box down is about the sex of the bumblebee. Now that's a little bit tricky, or sex of the bee, I should say, not just bumblebees. You've got either you haven't recorded it, male or female, or if you've got a group, they may be mixed. Early in the season, when you see bumblebees, it is the queens that are on the wing, so that's definitely a female. And once the nest has become established, certainly the first workers are all females as well. To distinguish a male from a female, you really need to know something about the length of the antennae. But from my perspective, if I see a bumblebee early in the season, I'm very confident it's a female. If somebody else has helped you with the identification, then you can actually add their name in the identified by box. And then moving over to the right of the screen, we can add in the quantity that we've seen, whether it's one individual or several. And we can also put the stage. Now, for most of the bees that you're going to be recording, it will be adults because they're the ones you see on the wing. The larvae all occur inside the nests. As you work down the page, you can see that there is the opportunity to add a photograph. And we would really encourage this if at all possible, because even people who've got a lot of experience with identifying bees can make mistakes, and adding a record just gives us confidence through the verifiers who look at these records to actually confirm that what you've seen is what you've said you've seen. In the case of the 5 species, or indeed any bee species you record in the bee hunt, I don't think the records would be regarded as sensitive, so that you can scroll on down to the location where we need to know where this is. Now, we've chosen as our choice location to illustrate this the front of the Hancock Museum, because it's a site that many of you will know. So, for example, if you start typing in the word Newcastle, you'll get a map of Newcastle appearing. You can, if you know the grid reference, you can type in the grid reference, or if you don't know precisely the grid reference, you can use the map to zoom in on a particular square and click when you got to the point where you recorded the bee. And then the final boxes down towards the bottom are habitat and comment. Under habitat, there's a whole list of different habitats that you might see bees in, so you choose the appropriate one. For the Hancock Museum, it is effectively a garden around the museum there, so we've chosen arable land, gardens or parks as the habitat. And in this case, there is a sub box below that where you can specify gardens or parks. You fill in those boxes, you press the submit, and the record will then go off to be checked by very friendly people who will verify it, and if they think you've not got it right, they will come back to you and say why they think that your record is a bit more suspect. But hopefully you will all have a lot of success in getting records submitted this way.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And just to quickly add to that, if you are uncomfortable using iRecord and would like to do things in a different way, we do also have a paper form available on the NHSN website that you can fill in and send alongside your photograph to the NHSN email address, and we will do the hard work and submit that for you. And just further to that, if you have a bee that you are unsure of and you have an image, please feel free to send us that bee on social media or by email, and we will try our best with our amassed knowledge here to identify that for you. Well, moving on, there's a great many species of bees in the UK, and it can be quite daunting when you first start going into bees and looking a bit closer at the different groups. So I believe Charlotte now is going to give us a brief introduction to bee diversity.
Thank you, James. So when we think of bees, most often honeybees and bumblebees come to mind, but these actually only represent around 10% of species we have here in Britain. So we have around, well, over 250 species of bee, and the vast majority of these bees are known as solitary bees. Unlike honeybees and bumblebees, solitary bee females construct and provision their own nest burrows. So there's no worker bees like that of honeybees or bumblebees, and a nest burrow is a product of one female. So we have one species of honeybee, the domesticated honeybee. We have 24 different species of bumblebee. 17 of those are found in the northeast, and the rest are the solitary bees. Now, when we look at the solitary bees, there are some main groups that we can look at, and I'll get onto these main groups that you can find in your garden. So firstly, we have the mining bees. As their name suggests, they dig into the ground generally to build their nest burrows, and these are the largest group of bees in Britain. Next, we have the mason bees. As their name suggests, they tend to use masonry materials such as mud. They may also use mud lined with pebbles as to line their nests with. And they may also even use chewed up leaves as well. And unlike most bees, the females collect pollen on their underside, so they have special hairs on the underside of their abdomens to collect pollen, whereas most bees actually collect pollen on their hind legs. Next up, we also have the leafcutter bees. These are out later in the year, so you'll find them out and about in summer. And the females cut sections of leaves, particularly from rose leaves, and then use these sections to line their nests. And as with the mason bees, leafcutter bees also collect pollen on their undersides as well. We also have bees that are really, really small and they're often overlooked. But if you look closely at them, they're often metallic and they can often be a nice turquoise colour as well. And these are generally known as the furrow bees. And these tend to nest underground. And you'll often find them on open flowers such as daisies and dandelions. And lastly, a group you might see in your garden are the cuckoo bees. So these can actually look quite wasp-like, and like the cuckoo bird, they sneak into the nests of other bees and lay their own eggs within. So some are quite specialised on one species, but some will also attack a collection of species. So while this is quite a sinister life cycle, it's part and parcel of the bee world, and this association has been happening for many, many years. So that was just a quick introduction to the different bee groups that you can find in your garden.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Charlotte. Obviously, as Gordon mentioned previously, for the purposes of the North East Bee Hunt, we selected 5 target species for you to look for. Of course, you are welcome to and encouraged to submit all bees to the scheme. For the purpose of these species, Gordon will now provide a brief introduction.
Thanks, James. So back at the start of the year, when we were trying to choose species to get people engaged with recording bees, we decided that we would start out with at least two fairly easily identified bumblebees. One is the tree bumblebee, which is around early in the season. It is very, very distinctively coloured, with a sort of russet thorax and a white tail. And then the other bumblebee is the red-tailed bumblebee. And this one has, as its name suggests, got a bright red tail. We wanted people to have something that was easy to identify, to get them into the idea of recording. And although we already knew quite a lot about these bees from previous records, it didn't hurt to have any more. I'm going to just show you the records of the tree bumblebee as shown on the NBN Atlas. And what you can see on this screen here is records that have been submitted nationally. It doesn't claim to be all of the records, but this is the NBN Atlas. This is the tree bumblebee, a relatively recent addition to the British fauna. It's been here throughout most of this current century. And you can see that the records, whilst fairly widespread, most records are around Newcastle here, and there are scattered records elsewhere, but there's still a lot of gaps that we can fill in on this one. The other bees we've got in our 5 targets for the North East bee hunt are solitary bees that Charlotte was talking about earlier. And one, the red mason bee, is very, very widespread. It, as Charlotte was telling us, builds its nests or digs holes into masonry or bee homes and bee hotels. But look here on the NBN Atlas at the numbers of records for this bee. They're really, really scattered, and we could do with far more information about how widespread this bee is. So the red mason bee is one of the solitary bees, and then there are 2 other solitaries that we've added to our top 5 for the bee hunt. Both of the other 2 are mining bees. One is the tawny mining bee, which has got very distinctive coloration. And then finally, the ashy mining bee. But we'll see a little bit more about their identification features in a moment. But those are the 5 that we're interested in. However, all bee records are very welcome through our recording portal.
Well, Charlotte, would you like to tell us a little bit more about how to identify these bees in the field?
Yep. So I'll start off with the tawny mining bee. So the tawny mining bee is a type of mining bee that digs into the ground to create their nest burrows. They tend to favour short grass and bare ground and flower beds even. And they dig up a lot of material. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that they have these volcano-like mounds around their nest entrances. And these are a really good sign that you may have tawny mining bees nesting in your garden. And the females are one of our most distinctive solitary bees. I like to think of them as a bee in a fox suit because they've got this lovely foxy coloured coat that's really dense and furry. And you've also got these black head legs and a black head face. So they are really distinctive. However, the males are less distinctive, and you need to look close at them really. But you can often detect them by their behaviour, so you can see them whizzing around the nest sites of females. Next up, we have the ashy mining bee. It's a really distinctive bee again. It's got this lovely monochrome look and it nests in the ground. So it's a type of mining bee. They tend to like to nest in sparsely vegetated ground or in bare ground. And the females on the left-hand side have these 2 broad ashy bands. And this contrasts with their black abdomen, which can often give off a blue sheen in the light. And I've also got these black head legs as well. Whereas on the right-hand side, you have the males. You can just see there that the males are a lot smaller and slimmer. They've got longer antennae, which is a good feature to see that this is a male. So the males have longer antennae than the females. They also tend to have more extensive ashy hairs on their body, so it often extends to the abdomen. And they've got this really distinctive tuft of ashy hair on their faces, which from above kind of looks like a shoe brush. And that's another good way to tell that this is a male ashy mining bee. Next up, the final solitary bee, we have the red mason bee. So as Gordon said, they use mud to line their nests, and you can often find them in your garden bee hotels. So if you have a garden bee hotel with tubes plugged with mud, you most likely have red mason bees nesting in there. You can see from the image that both females and males have this orange-red abdomen, and that contrasts with the light brown thorax. And you can see straight away that the males are a lot smaller than the females. So the female's on the bottom and the male is above. The males also have longer antennae. They have a tuft of facial hair, that light brown facial hair that again looks like a shoe brush from above. And the females generally look more stocky, and they've got this dark haired face. And a quite unique feature of the females are these facial horns just below her antennae. And these are actually used back at the nest to mould the wet mud into place to line her nests. So they'll collect damp mud from around ponds and other damp places and carry this ball of mud back to their nests using their mandibles, their jaws, and they'll actually manipulate the wet mud into place with these facial horns. And now on to the bumblebees. I'll start with the red-tailed bumblebee. Red-tailed bumblebees tend to nest underground, so they can have quite large nests of around 300 workers. And they tend to use old rodent burrows because they have nesting material there from previous occupants. And the females, so both the queens and workers, have this lovely velvety black head body with a big red tail. The workers tend to resemble just smaller queens, so a good way to see if it's a worker is by the size. But the males can look quite different, but you'll only see the males later on in the year when the nests are starting to end. So again, the males have these red tails, but they have a yellow middle collar. They also have a yellow collar behind the head. And they also have a lot of yellow facial hair. And if you view this from in front, it kind of looks like a little mustache. And quite a few of the bumblebee species, the males, have this little mustache. So that's quite a good way to tell that it's a male. And another feature to look out for when deciding if it's a male or not is the longer antennae and also the lack of shiny hind legs. Because males don't collect pollen, they don't have pollen baskets. So they don't have these shiny hind legs where they collect the pollen. And lastly, we have the tree bumblebee. This is a recent arrival to the UK and the North East. So it was first found in the UK down south in 2001, and it was then recorded in 2007 in Northumberland. And it's quite unique in its nesting habitat compared to other British bumblebees. So they nest up high. If you have any bird boxes, you may find them nesting in there because it mimics their natural nesting habit of nesting in tree holes or tree cavities. And they are also quite unique in their coat. So they've got a unique appearance compared to other British bumblebees. So you've got this lovely ginger thorax, this black abdomen and a white tail. And again, the workers resemble small queens. They can look a bit like common carders, but the key thing to note is this white tail. Common carders never have this white tail. And when we look at the tree bumblebee males, they generally look just a lot more fluffy. They tend to have a lot more ginger hairs on them, so it often extends onto their abdomen. They have a conspicuous ginger tuft of hairs on the top of their head, and again they have this white tail. And as with all male bumblebees, they do have longer antennae, and they don't have these shiny hind legs because they don't have pollen baskets. So that's it for the 5 target species.
That's wonderful, Charlotte. Thank you very much. As mentioned previously, these are our 5 key species, but there are a great many bees out there, many of which you are likely to encounter in your garden. I believe you have submitted somewhere in the region of around about 18 species currently, and Louise now is going to go over a few of these.
Lovely. First one I'd like to talk about is a bumblebee, the common carder, which is very variable. I think that's the first thing I should say about it. Males and females can look very similar, although, as Charlotte says, only the females will collect pollen and have pollen baskets, the males don't. But they can be any mixtures of ginger, basically, but with lots of black or even white, and all mixtures of ginger. So they're very, very variable, and people often get confused as to whether they really are common carders or not. The main thing to check is, do they have a white tail? If they've got a white tail, they aren't a common carder, they're actually a small tree bumblebee. So the queens are out at the minute. They're very large, but the workers can be actually minute to start with, and then as the nests develop, the workers get larger and larger with each successive generation, as long as the nest is successful. But some of the early ones can be as small as your little fingernail. So that's the common carder. They live in just above the ground in moss and grass tussocks. The next species is the garden bumblebee. We have quite a few white-tailed species of bumblebee in the area, but the main difference is that this one, in fact one of them called a white-tailed, there's also one called a buff-tailed, very similar, but the garden bumblebee has an extra yellow band. So it's got one at the front of its thorax, I presume we can't move, no, one at the front of its thorax, one at the back of its thorax, and also one at the front of the abdomen. The other white-tailed species do not have that one at the front of the abdomen, so that's what you're looking for. So we know this bee is a female because she's got a nice lot of pollen on her hind leg. So that's the garden bumblebee. Quite a big bumblebee, this one. The next species we'll look at are, in fact, the next 3 species we're going to look at are all solitary species. The first one is the hairy-footed flower bee. It's actually at the moment very rare in Northumberland and County Durham, but it is coming north, and it's jumped. In 2011, we've got records onwards from 2011 in the Alnwick area. So if you live in that area or anywhere, keep your eye open for the hairy-footed flower bee. It's unusual. I mean, obviously bees, the males and the females, as we've seen from what Charlotte has said, can look very different. They're even more different in the hairy-footed. They show real sexual dimorphism. The males are a ginger colour all over, and both the males and females look a little bit like a bumblebee, and they act a little bit like a bumblebee, but with a very darting and hovering flight in front of flowers. The female is actually a black bee, with only its hind leg hair is ginger, orangey ginger, and very distinctive bee therefore. And they are coming this way, so hopefully you will be able to see those, and we'd love some more records of these. They live in cob walls and soft mortar and soft cliffs. So one thing I should say is that aerial nesting bees, as this one, collect their pollen on pollen collecting hairs underneath them, so that whereas the ones that nest in the ground collect their pollen on their hind legs. So the next species we're looking at are 2 ground nesting bees, mining bees. The first one is the chocolate mining bee here that you can see on the screen, and it carries its pollen. This is a female, and on her hind leg you can just see the top of the hind leg has brownish black hairs and the underside has white hairs, and she carries her pollen there. So that tells you she's a ground nesting bee and not living in a bee hotel, for example. So she would never live in a bee hotel. This particular species, we have a lot of these in Northumberland, are very similar to the next species. They look very similar. They've got ginger hair all over. Like Charlotte says, the males have longer antennae, are actually slightly difficult to identify, but the females can be identified easily from photographs of both species, but this hind leg hair is the main difference. Unfortunately, if they're covered in pollen, you can't see the hind leg colour. So you have to actually catch one perhaps coming out of the hole rather than going in. So they nest in the ground, but this particular species, the chocolate mining bee, does like nesting between stone walls and stony areas, and is unusual in that it's actually got likes to have a communal nest entrance. So you'll see lots of bees going in and out of one hole. They're not actually nesting together, they are actually nesting separately. Behind that communal entrance, they separate into separate cells and separate tubes where they burrow and make their own nests. So they are still solitary, but they do have this strange habit of actually going in together. My garden, I've got 5 or 6 entrances to communal areas. The next species looks very similar. The buffish mining bee, again, ginger hair all over. Males, again, will have longer antennae. This is a female. We can tell that because she's nice and rounded, she's a bit plumper, and she's got this lovely gingery hind leg hair where she collects her pollen. And she lives in vast numbers in some areas, and in huge, what we call aggregations, where all the nests come together, where you can see thousands of little holes with little volcanoes of soil where the females are all nesting. And if you live near the spectacles, well worth a visit at this time of year, because there are, well, hundreds of thousands of them at the moment out there. So we'd love more records of these, but you do need to take photographs without pollen on. So if you can collect them going out of the nest rather than going into the nest, that'd be super. Or just arriving at a flower before they put pollen on. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Louise. I know I'll certainly be looking out for those species. Just before I let you all go, we've been receiving a great deal, many of questions via social media, and I thought I would put a few of these to you today to test a little bit of your bee knowledge. The first one, and quite a popular topic as more of us at home focus more on gardening and making our own space better for wildlife. And I wonder if each of you could provide one top tip for making your garden bee friendly. Starting with Charlotte.
Yeah, so my tip would be to provide nectar and pollen throughout the seasons. So from early in the year till late autumn, because bumblebees are active from early in the year to late in the year. But you've also got the solitary bees that are active at different times of the year. So it's really important to provide plants for bees throughout the year and make sure that there's no gaps missing.
Wonderful, thank you. How about you, Gordon?
Well, I think that people quite rightly are concerned about pesticides, and I suppose the best way to maximise any sort of wildlife in your garden is to reduce not only pesticides in the wider environment, but the pesticides you use. It's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking, well, yeah, but those aphids on my roses are really bad, I'm just going to give them a squirt with this. But any pesticide is going to be bad for insects in particular, all insecticides obviously. However, having said that, I think that it's reasonable that if pesticides are used properly, that is according to the label recommendation, they are reasonably safe for wildlife. But we know that pesticides widely in the environment, as used properly by farmers in the past, certainly have had some detrimental effects on bumblebees in particular. And so, although we can't tease apart the effects of pesticides from some of the other problems that bumblebees are facing, bees in general, no pesticides. Put that spray gun away. Get your camera out instead.
Very important message, Gordon. Thank you. And finally, how about you, Louise?
For me, it's nesting habitats. Think about nesting habitats in your garden, particularly. And basically leave a lot of areas alone that you would perhaps think, oh, I'll tidy that up. Under your hedge, for example, areas at the edge of your lawn, if you've got some wild areas, leave tufts of grass, leave a bit of moss, tussocks and so on. And if you get bees nesting in your bird box, fine, they'll be there for one season, maybe only a few months, and then they'll move on, and just enjoy them and leave well alone. If you've got bees nesting in your lawn, you can mow over them, just lift the height of the mower and just let them get on with it. But you can still carry on mowing and so on. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question, and I'm going to pick on you for this one, Charlotte. A lot of people have been submitting photos of bumblebees, and on many of these bumblebees there have been visible mites. And people are quite curious to know what these are and whether or not they're harmful to the bumblebees.
Yeah, so they do look rather itchy and seem to be a bit of a nuisance, but they are actually harmless. So these mites are actually hitchhikers, essentially. So they overwinter with queens, and they stay on the queens until she finds a nest. And once she finds a nest, they'll drop off and then spend their days feeding on all the waste products of the nest. So in a way, they are quite beneficial to the nest, and they don't present any harm to the bumblebees.
Really good to know. And finally, for the last question, there are a lot of insects out there that look a lot like bees, bee mimics. You wrote a wonderful blog post on a few of those last week, Charlotte. So I guess to all of you, could you perhaps give people at home an idea of how you can quickly and easily separate bees and bee mimics? Gordon.
The first thing I look at when I see something which might be a bee is whether I can see its antennae, because the bees have generally quite large antennae sticking out from their head. You can see them quite distinctly. The most common mimics of the bees are flies, and the flies all have, or certainly in these groups of flies, they all have very small antennae. They're almost so small that people say, well, they haven't got antennae until you look at them under magnification. So my tip would be, has it got visible antennae? I don't know if anybody else wants to chip in with a tip for differentiating mimics from the real bees.
So flies also have these big eyes that cover most of their heads, whereas bees don't really have those. So they have like big googly eyes, and that's one way that I determine whether it's a fly or a bee.
And if you've got a good digital photograph, you can see how many pairs of wings there are. Bees have 2 pairs of wings, whereas flies only have 1 pair of wings. But that's not easy to see. I don't think I can't see them in the field so easily, but it is an important feature difference.
I think if you've got a good sight of the fly, sometimes you can see, rather than counting the numbers of pairs of wings, you can see the fact that the hind pair of wings on the fly are reduced to tiny little drumstick affairs, which are the reduced former hind pair of wings.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. So I guess all that's left to say is a great big thank you to everybody watching at home for this, and a thank you to all 3 of our wonderful speakers today. Please continue getting involved with the North East Bee Hunt, submit your records, test our ID skills, send in your photos, and follow us on social media. If you would like to learn a bit more about bees as part of the North East Bee Hunt, you can also revisit Bumblebees of the North East publication, available to all members free of charge on the NHSN website. You can also rewatch the relating talk, The Bumblebees of North East England, on the NHSN blog currently. And finally, we are also releasing a lot of themed blog posts, at least a few times a week, and we will be over the next few months. Please check these out. They cover topics as diverse as rare bees in North East England, to bee mimics, bee flies, and species-specific focuses on each of the individual target species. Other than that, thank you again, and thank you for joining us.